Okay, so what if I told you that a pretty serious scientific paper from way back in 1960 predicted the exact date the world would end? And I'm not talking about some far-off century. I'm talking about November 13th, 2026. Yeah, that's right. So today, we're going to dig into what's known as the Doomsday Equation. Now, you've probably seen some wild headlines about this, but what is really going on with this date? Was it some kind of real prophecy, a big math mistake, or, and this is the interesting part, was it something else entirely? So that phrase, squeezed to death, that's pretty intense, right? It actually comes from a paper published in the journal Science back in 1960. The team behind it, led by a physicist named Heinz von Foerster, wasn't worried about asteroids or anything like that. Nope, their doomsday was all about us, our own population growth.
All right, so how on earth did they get to such a wild conclusion? Well, it all boils down to how they looked at the way we as a species multiply.
They argued that human growth isn't just exponential, like bacteria in a petri dish. They said it was something else, hyperbolic. So what's the difference? Well, think about it like this. For most animals, more of them means more competition, right? Less food to go around. But for humans, historically, more people meant more brains working together. They called this coalitions. We solve problems, we invent technology, and that allows the population to grow even faster. The key thing here is that the rate of growth itself was speeding up.
And you can really see this in the numbers. Look at that acceleration. The time it took for our population to double just kept getting shorter and shorter and shorter. It was this absolutely explosive pattern that led them to their big and pretty scary conclusion.
So they took all this data, almost 2,000 years of it, and plugged it into their formula. And the curve they got back wasn't just steep, it went completely vertical, just straight up. And it hit that wall on one very specific day. Mathematically speaking, on November 13th, 2026, the human population would, theoretically, become infinite.
Okay, but here's the twist, and this is the really brilliant part of their whole paper. This was not a literal prophecy. It was way more clever than that. It was basically a warning, hiding inside a math equation.
So did they actually think the population would become infinite? No way. Of course not. They knew that was impossible. They were just using this insane mathematical result to make a really powerful point about where we were all headed.
They called it doomsday for a reason. It was the point where the existing rules of human growth just had to break. You can't have infinite growth. It just doesn't work. That date was what's called a singularity. It's the breaking point, the moment the whole system just collapses on itself.
So their real message was this. Humanity couldn't just sit around and wait for natural forces, like famine or disease, to slow us down anymore. The system we had built was just too good, too powerful for that to happen.
And that leads us to their main point. They were essentially saying that we, as humans, would be forced to take the wheel, to consciously manage our own future. We'd have to use what they called social forces, things like family planning, education, resource management, to keep the whole thing from crashing.
Okay, so obviously we're still here. We're not on track to be squeezed to death in a couple of years. So what happened? What changed the equation?
Well, in a really fascinating way, their prediction actually came true. The system did break. Those social forces they talked about, they kicked in and completely changed our path. This huge global shift is what we now call the demographic transition.
And what were those social forces? Well, they were exactly the kinds of things you see here. Better education, especially for women, more economic development, and of course, widespread access to contraception. These things completely rewrote the math of how our population grows.
And the difference is just massive. You can see it right here. The 1960 equation was pointing to this out-of-control, runaway train. But what really happened was a major slowdown. The curve bent, big time. So, instead of heading toward infinity by 2026, the UN now thinks the world's population will probably peak sometime in the 2080s at around 10.4 billion people. And after that, it'll likely start to slowly go down.
So, if the 2026 doomsday never happened, why should we even care about this old equation? Well, because the lesson behind it is maybe more important today than it was back then.
Think about it. We dodged the overcrowding bullet they were worried about. But the paper's real warning that our own success creates these huge, complicated problems that we have to actively manage, that warning is hitting us right between the eyes today.
The challenge didn't go away, it just changed its clothes. Back in the 60s, the big scary thing was just too many people. Today, it's the side effects of all our technology and all our stuff. Things like climate change, artificial intelligence, nuclear weapons, you name it.
When you get right down to it, the Doomsday Equation was really a story about choice. It predicted a moment where we would have to choose to take control of our own destiny. And we did. We changed course and avoided that particular crisis. So the question it leaves us with is a big one. We're facing a whole new set of doomsdays now. Can we make the right choice again?